Hello and welcome to NCODA's National Monthly Webinar. My name is Steven Zeiter and I'm a project manager with NCODA. We have some great speakers and many interesting topics in store, so I'm very excited to get started. I would like to review some features and controls of Zoom. If you joined us by phone, you will only be able to listen to the webinar. If you joined us by computer or the Zoom mobile app, your mic will be muted by default. However, you are able to ask questions and contribute to the conversation in a few different ways. First, if you have a question that you would like to ask via message, please click on the Q&A option on your screen. If you would like to ask a question or contribute using your microphone, please select the Raise Hand option on your screen. It will then turn green and it will notify the host that you raised your hand. The host will then give you the option to unmute your mic. The host will then prompt you to unmute your mic during a designated period, allowing you to ask your question. As always, regarding mic etiquette, please mute your microphone if you are not speaking. Before we get into today's presentation, I wanted to share some great news. You can now find NCODA videos on both YouTube and Vimeo. The videos include highlights from past national meetings, as well as snippets from previous national monthly webinars, including PQI and Clinical Corner presentations. These videos are designed to allow all NCODA members to remain engaged. To see these videos, visit YouTube or Vimeo and type in the keyword NCODA. We have a full agenda today. Presenters from 10 different states will be speaking. First, our opening remarks will be delivered by Shinada Monesteem. Next, our PQI clinical overview on copanlisib for the management of relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma by Andrew Kowalski. Alabama Oncology is our practice and focus this month. Austin Cox will talk about his practice. Steve D'Amato will talk about drug supply chain distribution and health plan pharmacy consolidation. Sharita Howe from Virginia Cancer Institute will give our clinical corner presentation on Copictra for relapsed or refractory CLL/SLL, sponsored by Veristem Oncology. Robin Zavad will provide us with an update on NCODA's professional student organizations. We have two current issues and effective practices updates. The first is on patient access and will be delivered by Melissa Page. The second is on USP 800 and will be delivered by Karen Kellogg. Julie Ducker will talk about NCODA's Living the Mission Award, which will be given out at our upcoming Fall Summit in Orlando. Daniel Brescher will talk about NCODA's recent patient satisfaction survey data. And finally, Matt Schultz will highlight NCODA's discussion board. First up to talk about our mission statement, vision statement, new member practices, and sponsors is Shinada Monesteem, Assistant Professor of Hematology Oncology at the University of North Texas System College of Pharmacy. Shinada.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and welcome everybody. So as you know, NCODA's mission statement is to advance the value of dispensing practices for oncology physicians, provide the leadership expertise, quality standards, and sharing of best practices with all members, and to deliver positive outcomes through collaboration with all stakeholders involved in the care of oncology patients. Our mission is to be the world leader in oral oncology by building a patient-centered, medically integrated community whose focus is to innovate the continuity of cancer care so every patient receives the maximum benefit from their cancer treatment. I would like to welcome all of the new practices that have joined since last month's webinar, starting off with Central Care Cancer Center in Kansas, Ironwood Cancer Research Center in Arizona, James M. Stockman Cancer Institute in Maryland, Katmai Oncology Group in Alaska, Lutheran Medical Center in Colorado, Nova Southeastern University College of Pharmacy in Florida, Rocky Mountain Oncology in Wyoming, Seattle Cancer Care Alliance in Washington, University of Arkansas Medical Sciences Medical Center in Arkansas, Verdi Oncology in Indiana, Wake Forest Baptist Health in North Carolina, and last but not least, Winship Cancer Institute in Georgia. I also want to take a minute to acknowledge our sponsor for this month's National Monthly Webinar, Veristem Oncology. Veristem Oncology is sponsoring our Clinical Corner presentation today, and we really want to thank you for your support of NCODA. And lastly, we should be very proud that NCODA is growing by leaps and bounds. We are now 1,180 plus members and 360 plus practices strong. By working together, we become stronger. Thank you for your continuous support of NCODA, and just ahead, please enjoy the program that we put together for you, our members.
Thank you, Shinada. Prior to our PQI clinical overview, I would like to invite Matt Schultz to talk about NCODA's PQI and PQI in Action initiatives. Matt.
Thanks, Stephen. The PQIs are documents that promote higher quality patient care. This is done by increased speed to therapy, reduced costs and hospitalization, and by improving persistence and adherence. They're concise 1 to 2 page, peer-reviewed documents that highlight a specific aspect of patient care for healthcare professionals. The goal is also to increase multidisciplinary team interaction and communication, and thereby improve patient care. And what's at the heart of every PQI is the best interest of the patient. As you may know, we have quite a few PQIs on the website. There are 22 currently, and we are moving forward into bringing probably about 20 more this year. As such, we're always looking for authors, so if you're interested in writing about a topic, please let us know and we'll get you signed up. In addition, we take the PQI a step further with our PQI in Action review. That will highlight a particular practice and their use of the PQI with the multidisciplinary team that resulted in a positive patient outcome. So we are also looking for practices interested in that. Please let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Next up with our PQI clinical overview is Andrew Kowalski, PQI2 oncology pharmacy resident at Yale New Haven Health in Connecticut. Andrew will speak about the PQI that he co-authored with Sam Abdelghani, pharmacy manager at Smilo Cancer Hospital, on copanlisib for the management of relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma. Andrew.
Thanks, Steve. So I just want to take a few minutes to go over the PQI that I wrote. Start off with a little background information. Follicular lymphoma is the most common subtype of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which includes both a variety of aggressive and indolent malignancies, follicular lymphoma being more on the indolent side of the spectrum. But patients with relapsed and refractory follicular lymphoma do have limited treatment options based on the NCCN guidelines. And copanlisib is actually FDA approved and included in the NCCN guidelines after patients receive at least 2 lines of previous therapy. This FDA approval was based on an article that was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology in 2017, which is a phase 2 trial of copanlisib by Drayling and colleagues. Copanlisib takes advantage in its mechanism of action of the overexpression of phosphatidylinositol 3 kinase, or PI3K inhibitor, that is usually overexpressed on B-cell malignancies. So copanlisib inhibits this pathway to cause this mechanism of action. It is actually the second drug on the market following the oral version of a PI3K inhibitor, idelalisib, for follicular lymphoma. The main difference between these 2 drugs is that they have unique toxicity profiles and that idelalisib is an oral drug, whereas copanlisib is intravenous. Next slide, please. So when you receive an order for a prescription for copanlisib as a clinical pharmacist, there's a few things that you should be aware of. The first is to make sure that it's being used at an appropriate place in therapy. So per guidelines and package insert recommendations, it should be received following for patients that have received at least 2 prior lines of therapy for follicular lymphoma. So it's very important to check that. And then also there's a unique toxicity profile associated with copanlisib as well. The first one is an increased risk of infections, including bacterial, viral, and fungal infections, but also PJP infections. It's not actually recommended to do upfront PJP prophylaxis for patients, but if a patient is suspected to have PJP infection, they should be treated with copanlisib on hold. And then once the treatment is completed for the PJP, you can resume copanlisib, but with secondary prophylaxis on board for PJP. Another important consideration is the potential drug-drug interactions with copanlisib as a major CYP3A4 substrate. The package insert does recommend to decrease the dose of copanlisib if this is necessary, but it also recommends preferably to avoid any potential drug-drug interactions. If you do need to use a strong inhibitor such as voriconazole with copanlisib, it's recommended to dose reduce from 60 milligrams to 45 milligrams given on the same dosing schedule. Am I going to the next slide, please? So some of the more common side effects that are associated with copanlisib include hyperglycemia and hypertension. In fact, grade 3 hyperglycemia occurred in 25% of patients receiving copanlisib in clinical trials. And it's recommended that we monitor blood glucose at least pre and post infusion. And it's recommended to hold until the fasting blood glucose is less than 160, or the random blood glucose is less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. And they also recommend specific dose reductions in the package insert if at any time the patient has a blood glucose recorded above 500. The hypertension associated with copanlisib occurs in about 30% of patients and is often transient, usually remaining elevated anywhere from 1 to 8 hours post-infusion. So it's also important to check blood pressure pre and post-infusion and to discontinue if life-threatening. If it's a mild elevation in blood pressure, you can use appropriate antihypertensives. And the next slide. So as a clinical pharmacist, it's important to be able to counsel a patient and make them aware of things they may not be aware of as far as what could be associated with a drug toxicity, particularly things like confusion or a headache, maybe indicative of some of the more common toxicities associated with copanlisib, such as hyperglycemia or hypertension. But it's also important to make sure that they can be aware of the risk of an allergic reaction, the infections and pneumonitis, and then also diarrhea. With that, the next slide has my references, and I'll take any questions from any of the members on the line.
Great, thanks, Andrew. I want to let everyone know that we are opening it up for questions from our members, so feel free to utilize the chat or Q&A box or the raise hand function. But Andrew, thank you. And did also want to make note that this PQI is now available on NCODA's website, ncoda.org/PQI. Andrew, looks like we have a question that came in, and one of our members asks, in your opinion, what are some of the main takeaway points from your PQI?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Thank you for the question. I think for me, the biggest take-home messages would one to be, as an oncology community pharmacist, I think it's important to be able to assess the appropriate role in therapy. So that patients could be receiving this drug anywhere after receiving 2 lines of therapy, I think is a big takeaway. So it doesn't need to be one of the last drugs given, but it also shouldn't be a first-line therapy. And then the other thing I think that's important to focus in on is this drug, like many other drugs used for lymphoma, has a significant risk of infection. So I think it's a good role for the pharmacist to be able to recommend appropriate supportive care and interventions, maybe when it should be more suspicious and when we should hold the dose. I think all those things are important to be aware of with this drug. And then, of course, drug interactions, I'd say, is probably one of the top 3 that I'd like you guys to be aware of, too, because a lot of the supportive care drugs that we use for our patients with lymphomas tend to have interactions with CYP3A4. So it may be something that physicians might not be as acutely aware of. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as a result of this PQI.
Okay. Well, thanks, Andrew. If any other questions come in, we'll be sure to get those over to you. But for now, again, the PQI is available on NCODA's website, ncoda.org/PQI. And a video recording of this presentation will be made available on NCODA's website directly after the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce our practice in focus this month, Alabama Oncology. Representing Alabama Oncology is Pharmacy Manager Austin Cox. Austin will speak a little bit about his practice and why he joined NCODA, and how he and his team are partnering with NCODA now, and how they would like to continue to partner with NCODA moving forward. Austin.
Hey, thanks, Stephen. And thanks to NCODA for allowing me this honor of showcasing my practice today. So Alabama Oncology is the largest private community-based provider of cancer care services in Alabama. We have 9 clinic sites in central Alabama. We employ 215 employees. 22 of those are physicians. We have 18 medical oncologists, 2 gynocs, and 2 surgeons in our practice. We also have 4 advanced nurse practitioners. So that's kind of the makeup of who we are. And just a little insight, in 2018, we saw over 9,500 new patients, and we provided over 48,000 treatments in 2018. So some of our services are clinical trials. We participate aggressively in those. Like I mentioned, we have gynocs. We include hematology, medical oncology. We have a hepatic surgeon in our practice as well. And then we also have a retail pharmacy. So a little bit about our pharmacy. I manage that. We established this pharmacy in 2016 of February, and it encompasses supportive care as well as oncolytic care for our patients. in oncology and hematology. We are accredited with ACHC with ONC distinction, and we are currently pursuing URAC accreditation. I also need to mention we are an OCM practice, and we're currently pursuing on the clinic side a COPE certification as well. Our makeup for our pharmacy includes myself, 1 pharmacist, and 3 technicians, and I also employ a compliance officer who helps tremendously on the accreditation side of things. A couple of the reasons why I joined NCODA, you know, a couple of years ago, Mike Ref reached out to me personally and told me a little bit about the organization, and I looked into it, and I was just overwhelmed with the amount of resources that they provide, and I can't tell you how much it's helped my practice personally. It's raised our standard of care. I also have the honor of serving on the executive council, and you know, I can't even tell you how valuable it's been, the amount of resources and connections that I've made through NCODA, and just taking those best practices back to my own practice and helping our patients. So it's been a you know, it's a great group, and I look forward to many initiatives. One thing I'm very passionate about is implementing PQIs into our practice. So I'm often looking for ways that we can increase standard of care through those initiatives.
Great, Austin. Thank you so much. And for those who want to read a little bit more about Alabama Oncology, feel free to visit NCODA's website in the Practice and Focus section, and Alabama Oncology's profile will be updated today. Thanks again, Austin. Next up, Steve D'Amato, NCODA Advisory Board member and Executive Director of New England Cancer Specialists in Maine, will highlight some key points from his recent participation in a panel discussion on drug supply chain distribution and health plan pharmacy. Steve.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank NCODA for having me this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to join the group. And I was tasked with talking about our March 31st panel discussion at the ACCC Cancer Business Summit on the drug supply chain and consolidation in the industry. And a lot of you have heard or know that certainly there's been vertical integration. Now we're seeing vertical integration with payers and pharmacy benefit managers. So you have CVS, Aetna mergers, Humana Kindred, Cigna Express Scripts, Humana Walgreens. So this vertical integration is occurring. And when you look at the PBM market, the PBM market's worth about $300 billion, and it grows about 6% per year. And if you look at the CVS and Aetna merger, that was a $69 billion deal to increase their foothold in the market. So why is this important? As we see these multiple vertical integrations occur, what do we think will happen? Well, the proponents of these vertical integrations would say, oh, it's going to bring down cost and improve patient care. The exact opposite is being shown to be true, I believe. And so what we really worry about with this vertical integration of health plans and PBM managers is really higher drug prices and access issues for our patients. So this is not lost on the majority of us, and certainly with larger organizations that we deal with. It really, I believe, is going to be a problem for us moving forward as we try to maintain our foothold to dispense prescriptions to our patients. So if you look at this vertical integration, they're going to control about 80% of the market, not an insignificant amount. And so what do we do to combat that? I think that with all of us together and what we provide through NCODA and the data that we collect through NCODA will be very important moving forward to show the quality and value proposition that we have with medically integrated dispensing.
Sharita, clinical pharmacology. This month's Clinical Corner presentation is on Copictra duvelisib for relapsed or refractory CLL, SLL. Sharita.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, NCODA, for having me this afternoon. We have a lot of information to cover, so we'll get started. First, I want to start by giving an overview of chronic lymphocytic leukemia and small lymphocytic lymphoma. According to the American Cancer Society, CLL is the most common form of leukemia in the Western world among adults. In 2019, they're estimating that there will be almost 21,000 new cases of CLL and almost 4,000 deaths from the disease. So when we talk about CLL and SLL, we're actually referring to the same disease and just differentiating where the disease is located. Both diseases are characterized by an increased number of lymphocytes, and these lymphocytes are non-functioning. These patients commonly develop complications, including infection, anemia, and thrombocytopenia. In SLL, the ineffective lymphocytes are present mainly in the bone marrow and lymphoid tissue, whereas in CLL, the lymphocytes are also present in the blood as well as the bone marrow and lymphoid tissue. Next slide. So, just like with any other cancers, when a patient presents to the practice with CLL, we can determine their prognosis based on a multitude of factors, including the stage, the patient's age, their general health, and response to prior treatment. With CLL, we actually look at some other factors, including IGHV status, whether or not the patients have 11q or 17p deletions, and we tailor their treatment to some of these abnormalities. So the above chart just summarizes some of the cytogenetic abnormalities we look at to determine the prognosis of CLL. Next slide. So traditionally, when we would treat CLL, we actually used a lot of alkylating agents and purine analogs, but that used to be the frontline therapy for CLL, but now we're starting to see that the NCCN is recommending several oral agents, either as monotherapy or in combination with a monoclonal antibody. For example, ibrutinib or Imbruvica is recommended for the treatment of, it's actually a preferred first-line treatment agent for CLL in patients with or without a 17p deletion. And for relapsed refractory disease, we actually see several oral agents, including Imbruvica, Copictra, Venclexta, and Zydelic, with or without, for patients with or without a 17p deletion, and these medications, either given in monotherapy or with rituximab, can be used to treat these patients. Next slide. So for the clinical corner presentation, I want to focus on Copictra or duvelisib, which was approved in September of 2018 for relapsed refractory CLL or SLL in patients who have at least received 2 prior therapies. Next slide. So I want to give some general information about Copictra. It's actually available commercially as a 25 milligram capsule and a 15 milligram capsule. The 25 milligram capsule is used for standard dosing, while the 15 milligram capsules are reserved for dose reductions. The medication is given twice a day, and it can be given with or without food, and there are no dose reduction recommendations for patients with baseline hepatic or renal impairment. The medication comes packaged as a unit dose blister pack with 56 capsules. It contains 2 separate sleeves, and the sleeves contain 28 capsules apiece. Next slide. So how does Copictra work? Well, it's a PI3 kinase inhibitor, which Andrew touched on earlier, and it works much like the other oral agent, Zydelic. And so what PI3 kinase does is actually part of the intracellular pathway, which helps to regulate the cell cycle. So when you activate PI3 kinase, you activate AKT, which actually has downstream effects of activating mTOR complex 1. So you activate mTOR complex 1 and you have growth and survival of cells, and it actually decreases the cell's natural destructive mechanisms. So when we inhibit PI3 kinase, we actually inhibit mTOR complex, which leads to the suppression of these malignant cells. Next slide. So in the previous slide, I did mention that Copictra and Zydelic, they work sort of the same way, but Copictra actually has a slightly different mechanism of action. It does inhibit PI3 kinase, but it inhibits 2 different isoforms of the PI3 kinase. So it inhibits the delta isoform as well as the gamma isoform. The delta isoform is primarily found in malignant B cells, so when you block this isoform, you reduce the growth and survival of these cells. And the gamma isoform is actually found in T cells and tumor-associated myeloid cells. So when you inhibit the gamma form, you actually reduce the tumor support cells, and it actually enhances the change of macrophages from a more immunosuppressive form to a more anti-tumor form. Next slide. So here are some clinical pearls about CoPictra or associated with CoPictra therapy. Much like Imbruvica and Zidelig, when a patient starts CoPictra, you do see that transient increase in the lymphocyte count. It does not represent disease progression, so keep that in mind. CoPictra also has a black box warning for infection, and the package insert actually recommends PJP and CMV prophylaxis for these patients. There are also warnings for diarrhea, colitis, cutaneous reactions, and pneumonitis based on results of the DUO trial. Unfortunately, for our grapefruit lovers, it is metabolized by CYP3A4, so we have to watch out for significant drug interactions. If a patient is receiving a CYP3A4 inhibitor, you're going to want to reduce the CoPictra dose to 15 milligrams twice a day. If it is given with an inducer, you actually would want to change that medication if appropriate, because it could decrease the efficacy of CoPictra. And if you're giving the medication with any CYP3A4 substrates, those medications may have to be dose adjusted as well. So one other thing to note about this medication is that intestinal perforation was not noted with CoPictra therapy. This is a side effect that was seen with Zidelig. Next slide. So CoPictra's 2018 approval for CLL or SLL was actually based on the results of a phase 3 randomized study known as the DUO study. In the study, 319 patients who had received at least one prior therapy were randomized to receive either CoPictra or ofatumumab, given at the standard dose for refractory CLL. The approval of CoPictra was actually based on efficacy and safety analysis of patients with 2 prior therapies. They determined that the benefit to risk ratio appeared greater in the more heavily pretreated population compared to the overall trial population. In this study, the primary endpoints included progression-free survival, and secondary endpoints included overall response rate, overall survival, and safety measures. Next slide. So I wanted to include this slide in the presentation to show that the trial did include patients with harder to treat disease. Patients were represented who had 17p deletions as well as TP53 mutations and unmutated IGHV. Those patients were also included in this trial. Next slide. So results are shown here. CoPictra actually extended the median progression-free survival for 13.3 months versus 9.9 months for the ofatumumab arm, and this was evaluated by an independent review committee. Patients with the 17p deletion were also shown, which is shown on the chart on the right. These patients also showed a longer progression-free survival with the median PFS of 12.7 months compared to 9 months for the ofatumumab arm. Next slide. These 2 slides or charts just show that progression-free advantages were also observed across all analyzed patient subgroups. That's shown in the table to the left. The hazard ratio for all groups was less than 1, which favors CoPictra. And as far as secondary endpoints, which are shown in the table to the right, the overall response rate was found to be significantly higher in the CoPictra group, 73.8% versus 45.3% for the ofatumumab arm. And also, patients in the CoPictra group actually had a significant reduction in the lymph node burden, 85% compared to almost 16% with ofatumumab. Next slide. So some common adverse reactions reported during the DUO trial were neutropenia, anemia, diarrhea, pyrexia, nausea, and cough. Some adverse reactions of special interest are listed on the slide. To the right, what we see here is that we have patients who experienced rash and pneumonitis, but these patients were often discontinued because of these side effects. But when you see some of the side effects like colitis and diarrhea, there was about 15% of patients who experienced that, but only about a third of them were discontinued from the medication. And for transaminitis and neutropenia, we really didn't have too many discontinuations of Copictra with patients with those side effects. Next slide. So dose modification and toxicity management strategies are provided in the package insert. For most adverse reactions, Copictra should be, well, not for most, but for a general rule of thumb is that if a patient experiences a grade 3 reaction or higher, you would want to hold the dose. And if it's a grade 3 reaction, you can restart the dose at 15 milligrams twice a day. If the patient is unable to tolerate this 15 milligram dose, then the patient would need to discontinue. Or if the patient experienced a confirmed case of PJP, the medication would also need to be discontinued as well. Next slide. So here are some, I apologize, for patients unable to afford their medication, the patient assistance programs are available and provided by the manufacturer. There's also a bridge program and a dose exchange program as well. So that just highlights some of that information. Next slide. So in summary, Copictra is indicated for relapsed refractory CLL and SLL in patients with 2 prior therapies based on evidence from the DUO trial, which showed significant improvement in progression-free survival. The adverse event profile is manageable and is consistent to what was previously seen and observed with other PI3 kinase inhibitors. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Sharita. So what we'll do is we'll open up the floor for questions using the chat or Q&A box. Feel free to utilize those functions as well as the raise hand function. And Sharita, early on we did get a question, and the question reads, if a patient is ibrutinib naive and progressed on other therapies in frontline, what clinical factors would you consider in the relapse refractory setting in choosing duvelisib over ibrutinib?
So in choosing Imbruvica over duvelisib, I would actually look at, for the patient's prior therapy, I would take into account the medications that the patient's on, whether or not they have hepatic impairment, since that would be something that would keep us from using Imbruvica. And I would just look at the overall patient presentation to determine whether or not I would use Copictra versus Imbruvica in that case. There are a lot of different treatment options now for patients who have relapsed or refractory disease. So it would just come down to what would work well for the patient based on just patient-specific factors, drug interactions, and whether or not the patient would be able to tolerate the medication based on how they present it to the practice.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sharita. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat or Q&A box below, and we'd be happy to get those questions to Sharita by the end of this webinar. If not, we can always ask your question to Sharita and get back to you as well. So Sharita, thanks again.
Thank you.
Over the last few months, NCODA has been establishing chapters of our professional student organization on college campuses nationwide. Dr. Robin Zavad, a professor at Midwestern University Chicago College of Pharmacy, will talk about the recent approval of an NCODA student chapter at Midwestern and how she believes students will benefit from the chapter. Dr. Zavad.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having an opportunity to share with you the very exciting news that we are in the process of getting a student chapter approved at Midwestern University on our Chicago campus. We held a meeting, and you can see a picture here, an introductory meeting in March. We had about 50 students attending, which was really exciting. Of course, food always draws folks, which is no big surprise to any of you. We have bylaws, a letter of intent, and we are scheduled to have a meeting with interested students, initially in pharmacy, in early May to sign a petition, which is a requirement of the university. we are eager to bring NCODA onto campus for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is some very unique career opportunities for our students. In addition, it helps us to add oncology-based co-curricular activities into our professional development courses, to bring some additional speakers to campus for our Common Hour, which is across the board, many different healthcare disciplines. And so we're really just eager to embrace the philosophies associated with NCODA and really share these opportunities with our students. And thank you very, very much for your support and for all the resources available to us.
Thanks, Dr. Zavad. Midwestern joins South University School of Pharmacy in Columbia, South Carolina, and the University of Rhode Island College of Pharmacy in Kingston, Rhode Island, as one of our first schools to establish an NCODA professional student organization chapter. We have a very timely current issues and effective practices section presentation by Melissa Page, Oncology Patient Access Principal Coordinator at the University of Virginia Health System. Melissa will talk about aspects of patient access. Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me. So I will go through everything about patient access in 5 minutes, high level. But everyone is trying to help out, at least in our facility. I know other facilities I've talked to, and pretty much we're just trying to get the patient on treatment. And so you have a lot of inconsistent processes, inconsistent results. You have offices off-site, nurses doing it. So that's kind of where the current landscape is, I think, in a lot of these facilities, even with a robust kind of pathways to get to the treatments for the patient. Next slide. So some of the current patient access barriers that we have, which it just all falls all together under financial toxicity, prior authorizations, and we're dealing, at least with our practice, I know, so we're set up as an outpatient specialty pharmacy, but we're actually getting punted a lot of the work from the infusion side of either if there's denials or if these medications actually need to be procured through the pharmacy benefit for your Entyvios, Remicade. So we were the ones who established this team at our facility, and it was never set up on the medical side, and we've been doing it for so long, about 10 years now, that we have really just taken it all under the umbrella of specialty pharmacy. Next slide. So this isn't meant for you to actually read, it's just to show that we really have 2 different pathways in our facility. So we have that green pathway, and that's the infusion. Patient gets on a treatment plan, and kind of it shows that loop into patient assistance. The patient assistance or patient access is that yellow section. Then the blue section is actually the one I'm going to be focusing on, and that's just how a medication actually gets prescribed and access to therapy so that patient can start it in record time and with as the least amount of barriers as possible. Next slide. So we've got 3 different categories, 3 different buckets that we really screen our patients for, and that's commercial, Medicare, or the uninsured, and the different assistance around them. And we've dealt with a lot of barriers. I mean, even though it's copay assistance, we're dealing with a lot of plans, at least in the state of Virginia, where these patients have an out-of-pocket max of like $5,000 for their prescription insurance. With one specialty medication, that takes, you know, like a month with this copay assistance. So with the 3 different buckets, we're really just identifying the patients right up front, and we have it set up to where when it's prescribed, the physician is letting us know, is this an inquiry or a fill? Where would they like it filled, and when do they need to start? And we're dealing with a lot of our like stem cell discharge patients as well, and other discharge, at least with oncology. And this, when I started at this facility, we had 2 people who did this patient assistance role. And now that we finally got URAC accredited, we have our specialty pharmacy. We've got about 28 plus people aligned with every therapeutic area. We've got clinical pharmacists embedded in each of the clinics to help with this navigation process. And what we would like is just for our physicians to be able to treat, as well as our nurses to treat at the top of their licenses, and kind of take this discussion out of their hands and to really help them navigate to just access to the medication. Next slide. And on this one, we get asked, are we making sure that we are leveraging, supplementing every other manufacturer resource, foundations? This is kind of just a high level slide of letting nurses or clinics, or even when I go and present, that they're really, navigation, there is no book to it. And so when you're dealing with these patient access barriers, you've got the 3 different buckets. You need to be able to lean on your field reimbursement, which I know a lot of offices really aren't connecting with them. And we're getting the salespeople come in, the key account managers, and the actual field reimbursement, which they all have different roles. And so my suggestion to you is really to identify that these different stakeholders have different messages and to kind of connect them. And even at a large academic center, it's really hard. I mean, you can show up on site and you really don't know where to go and who to connect with. So we kind of have this screening process of finding out what the needs are and to be able to identify, to connect, okay, are you anything around access barrier? Do you have a new drug that is going to be launched? And they connect with our team so we can screen through a whole bunch of questions, including where's the copay assistance? How does free drug work? Do you have trial start on your website? Is it a card? Next step. So with our team, when we get these requests, we've built the team. We're dealing with the pre-authorizations, the foundation support, the patient assistance, and a lot of these medications we can't fill just because we're locked out by the payers. And regardless, we are offering a service to our patients and to the clinics, regardless if we can actually fill the medication. And at that point, if we have to transfer out that prescription, we do, to the appropriate pharmacies. And it's really this team of navigation. And there's a lot of software out there to help you identify which pharmacy this can actually be sent to based on the patient's insurance. But there's nothing that I've seen that is actually identifying these limited distribution networks of where the drug actually is and who is contracted. So it's really helped to actually build this team, even with the software at this point, to really identify patient needs it on Saturday. Okay, these are the 4 pharmacies we know that can fill it, and just kind of navigating that pre-authorization and getting the appropriate overrides to get the patient started. And so our team is leaned on for any of these discussions and just trying to value a team such as this. We've helped out other institutions sharing our job codes, and I've seen other job codes out there, but we're all called something different. Sometimes the pharmacy does it. Sometimes they have the billing office that has a team that does it. And being able to have this conversation on, you have a patient and you have the infusion, maybe medical side, and you also have this pharmacy benefit side, and trying to give a patient the appropriate, like what it's going to cost out of pocket for it. You really need to rely on different teams or to kind of tie those strings together. And right now, even with our process, I feel like we may be a little bit further ahead to help identify and help patients get on treatment, but we're still doing Band-Aid processes. We're still leaning on other institutions to see what they're doing. And it's the same conversation. I mean, we're just trying to get these patients on treatment and navigation to the actual therapy, and knowing if you're wasting your resources to even know if that patient can get on therapy with their Medicare D plan. It takes a lot, and there's no rule book out there. So I appreciate NCODA and other organizations for actually trying to bring the voice of the advocate along with the manufacturers, along with these, just trying to navigate and make sure that patients don't take the path of least resistance and just give up, because we're their last hope on trying to understand their benefits and to get them on treatment. And honestly, when I'm talking with the patients, I feel like I'm selling a cruise or something. Like, don't give up, we got this, we'll get through it. It's like we're this emotional support as well in a lot of these therapeutic areas. And it could be oncology, it could be heme, it could be a pediatric patient, and they're all having the same type of stress. So being able to have a team to help alleviate those topics that physicians don't know how to appropriately address, or they don't know what a good copay is, and to really help that patient get on their treatment, and to make sure that they're getting streamlined answers and it's documented in a way, and that the patient stays on medication. So adherence, this is a big portion that we've seen in our facility. Next slide. So that's just high level of what we do in our organization. I can go on for hours about this, but just kind of wanted to jump back and kind of let you know what we've done in our facility as well. And we've really bridged this infusion to the pharmacy benefit and have been able to capture a lot of the plans that are mandating for them to fill on the pharmacy benefit side, and to also use manufacturer resources. Or a huge issue with our, at least hospital and our infusion, is a lot of these infusion medications are denied, and being able to then flip it over to a pharmacy benefit and trying that pathway. And so we've done a lot of navigation for our Medicare patients in commercial, but it's a pretty important role, and I enjoy it, and I advocate for manufacturer, for these groups, just trying to connect the dots and make sure everybody's on the same page. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa, for that really valuable presentation. And in the interest of time, we are going to move forward to the next presentation. But if you do have a question for Melissa, please drop it in the chat or Q&A box, and we'll try and get to it before the end of today's presentation. As a reminder, please save the date for NCODA's upcoming Fall Summit. This meeting will take place at the Gaylord Palms in Orlando, Florida from October 24th to the 26th. For more information, please visit NCODA.org/summit. Information will be updated on the website in the coming months, and you will also be receiving e-blasts from us regarding meeting details, like when registration will be opening, etc. So please keep an eye out. Next up, Julie Ducker, pharmacist in charge at Southeast Nebraska Cancer Center, will talk about NCODA's Living the Mission Award. Julie received this award at our Fall Summit in 2017. Julie.
Hello. I am so excited to see the growth of NCODA. It's just amazing to me, actually. The impact that so many people have had on this organization and those involved has made a huge difference. So at the summit this fall in Orlando, NCODA will honor a member with the Living the Mission Award, and it was established to recognize members who exemplify the mission and values of NCODA. There is nomination criteria. The member needs to be part of NCODA for at least a year, and they may not be a part of the executive council, and they must be an active participant in NCODA. Nominations actually will need to go to Jan Montgomery. Her email is there on the slide, and they are due no later than Friday, September 27th. So feel free to contact NCODA or Jan, and look forward to seeing you in Orlando.
Thank you, Julie. Are you looking for ways to take advantage of your NCODA membership in 2019? Here at NCODA, we pride ourselves on collaborating with our members. Here are some ways which you can become an active participant within NCODA. These 7 great committees and Opta are always looking to add active participants. NCODA can also assist with setting up Be the Match donor drives at your practice. If you want to learn more about how you can get involved in NCODA committees and initiatives, or how you can host a Be the Match donor drive event, please visit NCODA.org or email us at contact@NCODA.org. We have a very timely current issues and effective practices section presentation by Karen Kellogg, Director of Practice Consulting at Cardinal Health. Karen will talk about USP 800. Karen.
Thanks, Steve. It is always exciting to be invited to do something at your conference or your conference calls. I'm just really excited the impact you all are making. So congratulations. I wanted to talk about USP 800 and provide a little bit of an update. There are 2 questions that I get most often from practices. The first one is, do you really think it's going to go into effect December 1st? And do you think there's a possibility that it's going to be delayed again? And that answer is no. The original reason why it was delayed from July to December was to consolidate all of the general chapters into one effective date so that they can routinely update these on a cadence of about 5 years. So that's the only reason it was delayed. The second question I get is, well, who's really going to come in and hold us to these standards? And there's a few of these areas that I'd like to highlight. First of all is the role of your state. So if there's some state legislature that passes regulations that allows the Board of Pharmacy or the Board of Medicine to come into your practice, then they do have the authority to come in. Even though the state may say, well, we're not going to do that, and we're not really going to recognize that, or we're not going to have regulations or inspections around that, it does not mean that you will not be held to these standards. Because entities like the FDA, like OSHA, like CMS, Medicare, and Medicaid, they do have the authority to come in based on whether you're doing research, if there's a complaint, or even if you're dispensing to Medicare patients, they would have the authority to come in and inspect. Next slide, please. So looking at the risk reduction, NIOSH has put together this diagram that I think is really effective in looking at how we control the risk. First of all, we could eliminate the product, which really isn't an option for us. We could substitute it, which a lot of times isn't an option for us either. So really where we're going to make the most impact is starting with the engineering controls and the environment in which we're dispensing these products. We're going to look at administrative controls, which are how your employees work and policies and procedures around their work. And then very last is the protective equipment, which I always find that interesting, that it's the least effective method, but seems to get the most attention. Next slide, please. So what about the oral drugs? There are oral drugs that are listed on the NIOSH hazardous drug list. So in order to be compliant and create this safe work environment, it's good to have a designated area that is away from the general public, that only staff members that are going to be dispensing have access to. Performing an assessment of risk, so you know what products you're handling and what the risk of exposure is. Having policies and procedures surrounding everything from how the drugs are delivered, how they're stored, how they're dispensed, and then how you clean up and provide for waste. Use of protective equipment, and this would be up to the facility and what you believe your assessment of that risk to be. And then absolutely staff education, making sure that they're aware of policy and the products and how to dispense them. Next slide, please. So what is your assessment of risk? So the first thing you would need to do is look at this NIOSH list of hazardous drugs. It's due to be updated. I haven't seen that yet, but as soon as it is, you can use that one or use the one that was back from 2016. Look at the list of drugs and see which dosage forms and which drugs you're handling and dispensing, and then look at a risk assessment for each medication. So each medication should have a document. You can use a 3-ring binder. You could keep a file online, but these documents do need to be reviewed annually. And if anything new comes to market that you're going to be dispensing, you'll need to do a risk assessment for that drug as well. Next slide. This is a sample of what an assessment of risk looks like. It's from the Pharmacy Purchasing and Products magazine article, but it's very detailed. Really, you need to account for the bullet points on the left-hand side, so you can create your own form as long as it has these things covered. You're going to need to document the type of hazardous drug, whether it's a cytotoxic drug or a reproductive risk drug. What is the dosage form? What you believe the risk of exposure is, so how your employees might be exposed. Looking at how it's packaged upon receipt. What type of manipulation? And this just means, are you just putting a label on the bottle, or are you counting out the tablets into a vial? And then documenting the specific containment strategies that you're going to be using to minimize the risk for your employees. Next slide. So really, don't stress about this, do your best. It's not about meeting the standards, it's about creating a safe environment for your staff so they feel comfortable handling these products. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Karen. And again, in the interest of time, we will have to forego formal Q&A, but if you do have a question for Karen, feel free to drop that in the chat or Q&A box, and we'll be sure to get that question to her. Karen, again, thank you. As you may know, NCODA has partnered with Be the Match over the last few years. The Be the Match registry is operated by the National Marrow Donor Program, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to creating an opportunity for all patients to receive the marrow or umbilical cord blood transplant they need when they need it. It is the largest and most diverse donor registry in the world. As you can see here, donations to the Be the Match by NCODA members have increased year after year. Our goal for 2019 is $10,000 in total donations. So far, we're at $3,400. Donations can be made on the NCODA webpage under the Community tab or at one of our national meetings. We are also striving to help add 100 potential donors to the National Bone Marrow Registry by the end of 2019 through member donor drives. So far, NCODA member donor drives have helped add 20 new potential donors to the registry. If you are interested in hosting a donor drive, please visit the NCODA webpage under the Community tab or by following the link on the slide. There are great resources available on this page. NCODA, in collaboration with Syracuse University's Maxwell School, has developed a patient satisfaction survey. We collaborate with one student each semester at the Maxwell School. This survey quantifies data that patients, providers, and payers are interested in. Responses from this survey help us and our member organizations identify opportunities for improvement. Our student this semester, Daniel Brescher, will now give us an update on the most recent survey data. Dan.
Hello, how's it going? Thank you guys so much for having me. I wanted to thank NCODA, and I also wanted to thank Steven specifically. It's been a pleasure working with you guys this semester. So I'm a student at Syracuse University, as he mentioned, and the data that I was given was from four different oncology centers that are member practices with NCODA. These are Southern Oncology Specialists, Lancaster Cancer Center, Alabama Oncology, and Clearview Cancer Center. So I received a total of 341 responses in total. And one of the most impressive statistics I found through my analysis was, so in a survey I received 95 answers to the question, and 79% of patients surveyed responded great service when asked for additional comments about their experience at their medically integrated pharmacy. So I found that to be very impressive. And another statistic I found to be impressive was patients were asked to rate their general level of satisfaction with their medically integrated pharmacy. And out of the 341 patients surveyed, in 338 responses, 89% of patients surveyed that they were at least satisfied or very satisfied when asked to rate their level of general satisfaction. Every patient was asked all questions. Not every single patient answered every question, which is why the number of responses received for each question was not the same as the number of patients who answered surveys. I wanted to thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure working with you guys this semester, and I look forward to being in touch in the future.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you truly for all your hard work throughout the semester. Matt Schultz will now talk about a great platform available to all NCODA members to ask questions, contribute to the conversation, and collaborate. This platform is called NCODA Discussions. Matt.
The discussion board is an easy way to connect with your colleagues throughout the year. NCODA does represent a very unique membership organization that connects pharmacists, physicians, technicians, providers, nurses, administrators, on down the list. There's a wealth of potential here in connecting with your colleagues. So by all means, do share your stories, your battle wounds, etc. on our discussion board. You can find it by logging in, then clicking member resources, and then the discussion board. When you do post a topic, be sure to click the checkbox to notify you of follow-up replies. That way you know when someone has replied without needing to log in. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you to all of our speakers for their great discussions and presentations today. Thanks again to our Clinical Corner sponsor, Veristem Oncology. Last but not least, thank you to all of our members. Your continued participation and support is vital in our quest to improve patient care. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, please email contact@ncoda.org. Our next National Monthly Webinar is on Thursday, May 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We hope you can join us. From all of us at NCODA, thanks for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.